All right, welcome to the BTB Analytics college basketball model walkthrough. So I'm going to take you through this tool so you can understand how to use it to help bet spreads, money lines, and totals. But before we hop into this, I gave you a couple of quick things as a background so we're all on the same page. So when you're looking at this, what's actually happening behind the scenes is we're using three different models, blending them all together to get an actual prediction. We then take that prediction and we regress it to the market, meaning that we take our number and we average it out with what the market line is. And then use that, and we have a value framework to be able to assign how likely we think that our prediction, based on what the market line is likely to happen. And that's how you get some of these numbers here, which what we'll talk about in a second. So the reason I bring all this up is because you're going to talk about things like the probability, the edge, and then what the consensus is. And so you just behind the scenes understand that there are three different models at play, and we're using a value framework to actually price these things, and that's where these columns come from. All right, so without further ado, this is the main screen when you log in, and so you can see here the games all show up. They're going to be defaulted by game time, but you can click any of these columns to sort, high, low, etc. And then you can also use the select team search bar, and you can search for whatever team that you want to who's playing today. So for instance, if we want to do Florida State, boom, you'll see that populate the team there. So um, first and foremost, when we're using this tool, to use this ag or maximally, really what you want to do, our recommendation is to bet openers. And so what that means is once these lines drop, and it's typically the night before the game is played, that's when you want to be sort of hawking this thing and see where the value is, because we do expect to get closing line value on more these bets than not. And so if you're waiting until right before tip off, you're not going to see as much value, right? So looking here the night before is going to give you the biggest sort of slate to maximize your chances of winning. So without further ado, so we have game. That's just the teams who are playing. This team column is what the team that all the numbers are referencing in game time. And then let's get into the actual prediction. So predicted outcome. So this is going to be what we actually predict the spread is going to be. This is the final number with all of our models blended together and regress back to the market. And then the current spread. So we use odds API, and what we do is we take in the spreads from all of the major retail books, and we're looking for an average of what those numbers are. And so more often than not, you're going to see regular numbers like -7.5 or -15. But sometimes you'll see numbers that end in 0.25 or 0.75 when clearly there aren't spreads that exist like that. What that means is that there's just an average of two different numbers out there. So for instance, if you had a spread that said, -7.75 here instead, really what that means is that some books are offering -7.5, some books are offering -8, and so the average is -7.75. So just keep that's all that means. If you see that, it's not broken, it's just an average. And then what we care about here is it's not just about trying to figure out who's going to win or who's going to cover in these games. It's about finding value, right? Because value and edge is the name of the game and how you become a winning better. If you're consistently overpaying for bets, i.e., you're paying odds that are a lot higher than what the actual true outcome chance is, that's negative EV, and you would expect to lose money over time, even if you win individual bets. And then, two, even if you're winning those bets, it just makes your break even percentage, i.e., the number of bets or the percentage of bets that you have to win just to be even, it makes that number higher. And so we want to make sure that we're finding value as well as teams we think are going to cover. So the spread cover probability is just how likely we think that that probability is going to be. And so you can see here, a lot of these are going to be within, the mid 40s to mid 50s. You're never going to see anything that's much higher than that because again, we're dealing with spreads. And then edge for covering spread, that's just kind of like the name suggests. It's what the actual edge is. So remember, this is a lot of these spreads are going to be -110 odds, right? And so -110 odds just equals an implied probability of 52.4%. And so all the edge for covering spread column is, it's just taking whatever this spread cover probability is minus 52.4. Again, depends on what your odds are. They're a little bit different, but that's generally speaking the formula there. And so once you have that, then that's where you get the edge from. Now, sometimes you'll see lines that are -105, Sometimes lines are minus 115. And so that, the number may be a little bit different, but generally speaking, more often than not, that's where that number is going to come from. And then spread consensus. So again, remember, we have three different models that we're using. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure that you all had access to was understanding, do all three models agree? So a lot of the times we're dealing with very tight ranges. And so the predictions can be, a couple of points apart for each model, but the actual market line may be in the middle. So for instance, let's say that we have a team that's favored. Model A may say, okay, that team is favored by -2. Model B says, I think this team will win by -4. And then model C says, I think this team will win by -6, right? So all three of the models think that this team is going to win, and if the line is, let's say, -3, right, in that scenario two of the models think this team is going to cover, one model doesn't, and so that would be a no in the spread consensus because not all three models agreed on what side of the spread that this team would fall on. Now in that same example, if model A says, I have this team winning by 5 points, model B says 6 points, model C says 7 points, and again, the spread is -3, then yes, all three of the models do agree that the team will cover that number. And so that's what spread consensus is. And so really the art here is, definitely want to find, the biggest edge. That's the end all be all. But if you can find large edge and a spread consensus, as a yes, then that is the most conservative recommendation because that's the thing that we would expect more likely to win than not. Now, it's just gambling, it's sports betting, it's predictions. It doesn't mean it's going to be true all the time, but that's the way to set yourself up for success. Now, I will say our general recommendation, like for football, so NFL and college football, we typically say, 4% edge is what we like as our threshold. With college basketball, you don't seem to get that much of an edge unless they're huge, huge underdogs. When I say huge underdogs, I mean, 25, 30, 40 point underdogs. That's where, the edges seem to come out. That's 4% and higher. So as you use this and you get used to this, you may need to tweak what your threshold is. Maybe 4%, while the most conservative may not be practical as you start getting into conference play where you're going to see more level competition more often than not. And so just kind of understanding where your numbers are, but you definitely want to only look for positive edges, ideally 3%, 4% in that range. And then if you can get spread consensus, that's great too. And then we will have the full model record on the page as well. And it's broken down by all different categories: favorites, underdogs, spread point ranges, edge tiers, etc. So be sure to look at that so you understand where the model is, has strengths, where it may have some weaknesses, and how to best use it for your own betting needs. Okay, so that's it for spreads, right? So then coming down to money line, it's going to be the same exact definitions, but I do want to highlight a couple of nuances with money line. Okay, so current money line, again, that's just the price of what we're looking at here. The money line win probability, again, this is just what we predict, blending the models together. What the models predict that the team chance of actually just winning this game straight up is. And then money line edge. Again, so this is where things may be a little bit different. So money line edge is the difference between what we believe the probability of the team winning is minus what the current money line implied probability is. Okay. And so when there's edge here, all that's saying is that we think the team is going to win more often than what the current market line suggested would. Okay. It does not mean if you see positive edge that we think that that team will necessarily win. And I'll give you a couple of examples just to make sure this makes sense. So we can see here, let's look at this row: 2.7% money line edge, but the 12.2% win probability, right? At the current money line of plus 950, all this is saying is that at 12.2%, which is the number we make it, these odds really should be closer, to 900, below 900, 950. You're getting better odds than what we think should be the true value there. And so there's a 2.7% edge, right? That does not mean we think this team is going to win. We think if you play this game 100 times, this team only wins 12 of them. So don't hang your hat on, oh, I want to bet all the games that have the highest money line edges because they're going to win. It's really more of a factor of it's just mispriced. Now, what you can do though is you can look at money line win probability, and then you can say, hey, if I want to scroll down to teams where let's say that they're really 50-50 shots. Okay, so here we go. This is a perfect example. So we have a team here. We give them 51.6% chance of winning. The current odds are minus 102. Okay. So there's an edge here because we say that, hey, these odds should actually be probably closer to minus 105. And there's a money line consensus. All the model agree that the chance of winning is slightly higher than what the odds are. So this would be a bet that yes, you have an edge and you have a reasonable chance of it actually winning. On any given time. Same thing up here. So at 60.9% chance at minus 149, again, something that's likely to happen or more likely than not to happen, not an egregious, kind of crazy money line odds, and you're getting edge. So these are games I would target if you're looking to bet money lines. I wouldn't necessarily target games where the overall chances of winning are very low. These are low likely outcomes. Yes, the payout is great, but you're gonna have to bet a lot to actually realize that edge, and that's not what we're probably not what you want to do. All right. So then finally, totals. So totals are just like spreads, where we have the predicted total, the market total, i.e., what the current lines are, and then the over and under cover probability. And then same thing, we have the over edge and we have the under edge. And then we have consensus that says, hey, do all three models agree with the number being on a certain side of what the current lines are? And so I can tell you right now, unders so far, and this has only been a couple of weeks to the season, unders have been hitting at a pretty high clip, especially if you have unders with the yes consensus. These have been hitting pretty high. And so I would definitely target these. You will not see 4% plus edges in the totals. And so this is one where you'll need to definitely downgrade your threshold, and so probably around 2% is where you want to go if you want to be conservative. And then if you want to be a little more aggressive, really anything with edge, probably 1%, maybe a little bit less than that. But again, that part's up to you. But just understand if you're waiting for 4% in the totals, you're almost never going to see it. So don't wait around for that. It's not going to happen. But yeah, so that is how you use this model for itself. And then last thing I'll do is I want to go back and show the actual page here. So let's go back and let's go to, you'll see this on the website too. So this is the model performance record. And so we'll have this spread. We'll have this broken down by spread by edge. So again, what's the edge percentage there? You can see 0 to 2, 2 to 2.9, 3 to 3.9, etc. And then spread by edge. And was there a yes in the consensus column? And so you can see here the reason we give a buffer is that, in generally speaking, you never have the edge you think you have in sports betting, but you have to factor in for room for error. And so you can see here at the 0 to 1.9%. Again, it's pretty early in the season, but right now the model has a 12 and 19 record, right? And so this is why we say, hey, you definitely want to bump yourself up, give yourself a little bit more of a wiggle room. And so you can see here, once you make that threshold 2% to 2.9%, now the model is shooting 50-50, same thing for 3 or 3.9%, and then it starts winning at 4%, which is why, again, we say 4% is the most conservative, way you want to go. Now, again, it's super early. These numbers will change, obviously, but just early signal shows that if you want to be the most conservative, that's kind of where you want to be. And then when you look at just consensus only, you can see here, again, same thing. If you're dealing with under 2%, the model is actually currently losing on spread records. But once you give yourself a more of a safety factor, this is where you start seeing better outcomes. So when we look at point spread ranges, just kind of looking at this as well. So like how large are the spreads? So you can see 0 to 4.5 and all those tiers there. I will say, just kind of bump down for a second. When we look at these underdogs, like I mentioned before, a lot of these large edges are going to come on these underdogs, 20 points plus. And you can see here between 20 and 30 points in underdogs, the model's actually doing very well on picking up these spots where you want to back the underdog. Overall, 12-2 so far in that 20 to 29 and a half point range, trying to find those winners with value. And then when you get to 30 points plus, you can see here the model dips down to 6 and 8. And I can tell you from personal experiences betting these things myself, a lot of this is driven by the 40 plus point dogs where it's just either it's going to be somewhere reasonable or it's going to be an absolute blowout, right? And so you can see there, it loses a little bit of steam once you get to over 30 points, but really over 40 points is where it kind of drops off, at least in a very small early sample size. So again, if you're using this, I would say, hey, yeah, if you're looking at underdogs, look at these. The model really excels at finding these mid to moderate underdogs here. All right. And then over unders. So you can see here, like I mentioned before, you don't see 4% plus. You can see here 0 for really anything at 3% or more edge. And that's just that's just a mechanism of our value framework and how we price these things. And so you can see 4 and 2 with the lower tier edge and 0 and 2 at 2.2 to 2.9%. And then with unders, you can see here, even at the lowest edge here, between 0 and 1.9%, it's hitting at a 69% win rate at 18 and 8. And then you can see between 2 and higher, et cetera, overall looking at 8 and 6. Now, this is just edge without consensus. If you look at totals with consensus, okay, same thing. You see not a lot of favorites, especially on these higher edges. And then with unders, you can see there actually have been a couple of games with unders, surprisingly, with consensus. But again, same thing, really, really strong, even at the lower edge tiers. So, if you're looking at this may be a signal to say, hey, you can be a little more aggressive on trying to find value with lower edges in the totals than maybe you want to be in spreads, right? And so just kind of keeping an eye on that. Again, this updates once a day automatically, and it goes against the opening line. The records are against the opening line. That's really the only way to systematically do this. And so when you're looking at this, be sure to check out the full model record, throughout the season to kind of pick up on, strengths and signals, stuff like that. And then finally, money line performance. So what we did was we broke this down by tiers. So 10 to 19%, 20 to 29%, et cetera, et cetera. Now, again, we expect the 10 to 19% win probability games to lose a lot, right? And they're kind of right on pace here at 2 and 10. And then 20 to 29% chance, it's right on pace, winning at 21%. And then you can see here 30 to 39% is actually slightly overperforming, hitting at 40.7%. But again, these are games that you would expect to lose, but they're going to be higher odds. So, you would expect to have a losing record. If you're looking at games where they're 50% or more, i.e., you would expect the team to win more often than not, you can see it's actually doing very well on picking up teams that should win and how often they actually do here. And so you can see the win rate minus the 60 to 69% column, the win rate is going up as our expected win probability goes up, which is reassuring to see. And then same thing looking at money line, but with consensus. Again, broken down by the tiers, you expect these things to lose, but once you get to 50% and higher, again, you see a very strong correlation. And so what I would do, my takeaway from this is if you're someone who's looking for money line plays and aren't willing to lay heavy odds as long as there's still a positive edge, you can expect to see the win rate in line or maybe slightly better than what we project the win rate would be. And so these could be, your sort of not necessarily safer bets per se, but the bets that are more likely to hit. Just remember the higher odds that you bet, the more of them have to be right just to break even. So, there's no free lunch, right? So use that strategy, use it wisely, but definitely use it to your advantage. And then looking at money line win probability by 4% edge or more. Again, you don't see a lot of games, so there's a lot of 4% edge plus. And if you do, these are like your heavy underdogs, which again, you don't expect them to win necessarily. That's going to be definitely the minority, but you're offsetting that by the huge payoff. So that is the model in a nutshell. So hope this is super helpful for you. Again, please check out the reports. Check out the model, bet opening lines, i.e., the night before. That's going to give yourself the best chance to win and find value. And as always, stay sharp and good luck.